Hello and good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Lonnie Martin, and I am the Deputy Director of Events, Education, and Membership here at NASA, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. Today's webcast is brought to you by the NASA Senior Issues Committee. It's a series of NASA Senior Issue Presents, and today's topic is international approaches to stopping scams. Before we get started, I have a few announcements to make. It's in regards to the length of time for today's webcast. It's going to be 75 minutes. At the end of the presentation, you'll be able to get continuing education credit for the program. I also want to take a moment to mention that NASA's annual spring conference, Public Policy Symposium, will be held in Washington, D.C., and that slides on the screen. If you want to shoot the QR code, you can register for that event. For today's discussion, the speakers would like for you to type your questions into the Q&A box. They'll answer the questions throughout and take periodic breaks for more comments. The Q&A feature is located at the bottom middle of your screen. You'll just need to move your mouse around in order to find that. If you have any technical problems, please put those in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat for those issues. As for today, when asking a question, please avoid disclosing confidential, privileged, or non-public information. Also, the comments made by speakers on our webcast are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of NASA, their organization, or agencies unless specifically so stated. So without further ado, we'd like to go ahead and invite our host for today to give welcoming remarks. Andrew Hartnett, Chair of the NASA Senior Issues Committee and of the Iowa Insurance Division. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Lonnie. Welcome, everyone. As Lonnie said, I'm Andrew Hartnett. I'm Deputy Commissioner in the Iowa Insurance Division, co-chair of the Senior Issues Committee. We are in Iowa today having an unexpected snowstorm. So I am unexpectedly home for this webcast today. So those of you who remember that famous clip from early on in COVID of the BBC interview with the two kids who come in during the interview and the mom who's frantically trying to get them out. Goal number one is for that not to happen today. More seriously, the reason that we wanted to have this conversation today is that, oftentimes discussions of scams feel there's a sense of hopelessness, it seems, that pervade the conversations, right? The numbers go up year after year after year. And when you're talking about it more recently, not only are the numbers going up and up and up, but now we're talking about adding AI and adding AI on, on a scammer's phone. And so we wanted to do some programming that counteracts some of that hopelessness and talks about some of the things that we can do. And to that end, there are other countries in which the numbers are not going up and up and up and up, but rather, are seeing 30% and 40% decreases in reports of scams and fraud. And so that's a big part of what we want to talk about today. Before I bring our speaker on, I do just want to emphasize what Lonnie said about questions. You type them into the Q&A feature. We're going to stop throughout the presentation to answer them. When we've engaged with this material before, people have generally been really interested in it. And so the way that we built this program was, we built in a fair amount of time for Q&A. Thinking that people would have questions. So this is an invitation to please answer, or ask rather, all of our job to answer, but to ask all of the questions that you're thinking as we're going through this. We really built this not with an idea that, Ken and I would be talking for 71 of the 75 minutes and we'd squeeze 4 minutes of questions in at the end, but rather that, the presentation would be 30, 45 minutes, something like that. And there'd be a lot of time for questions throughout. So please do ask questions as we go along. We're going to stop at sort of designated times to talk and answer those questions. Okay. Without further ado, the way we're going to do this today is that Ken Westbrook, the founder and CEO of the Stop Scams Alliance, is largely going to march through a presentation that he has put together on international purchase of scams, and then we're sort of going to take a look at tech-enabled scams as a almost a case study of some of the things that we talked about at the beginning. So I'm gonna go away for much of the presentation. Ken's gonna talk, and then I'm gonna come back and we'll talk during Q&A. But Ken, why don't, as you get going on your presentation, I know your background. I know you come from the national intelligence background, and why you've decided to dive into a second career in stopping scams. But why don't you start there and tell everybody about your background and why you've devoted your second act to this topic.
Yeah, second act is a good way of describing it. So I'm Ken Westbrook. I'm the founder of Stop Scams Alliance. I started off my career in the government. I served for 33 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, and I was on the analytics side of the house there. So I was a CIA analyst for 33 years. I did all kinds of analysis, ended up being the chief of Ukraine branch when Ukraine was a brand new country. I was the deputy chief of the Balkan Task Force when we were at war in Bosnia and Kosovo. Later on in my career, the director asked me to head up the IT and data part of the CIA's analyst group. And then for 4 years, I went to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and I was there the Director of Information Sharing, working for the IC, the intelligence community's CIO. Then after retirement in 2012, I worked for some big companies like SAP and Oracle, have a patent there at Oracle. And then Georgetown University called me up and asked me to create a class for them. And so I did that because I'd never done academic work before. So seemed like a fun thing. So I created and taught for a while a class on information management at the graduate school at Georgetown University. And then in the spring of 2023, actually, it's now almost 2 years ago, my mom got scammed. She was scammed on the 14th of February, 2023. It's now the 12th of February, 2025. And her experience has led me to change my life and to start fighting back against the scammers. And to Andrew's earlier point about whether we should be pessimistic or optimistic about this, after my mom was scammed and I talked to a lot of people in the government, and I got a lot of pessimism. I can't tell you how many times I heard the words, "There's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do." Well, then I started to look into what other countries in the world were doing, and I discovered, shoot, there's a heck of a lot we can be doing. And so that's what led to this work, this research, and this presentation today. So should I just go ahead and plow ahead, Andrew?
Yep, just head on in. I think it's
all right. Let's plow ahead. So okay, let's start with just to get everybody going. Let's talk about the size of this threat in order to get our heads around where scams are going in the United States of America. In September, a U.S. Secret Service executive spoke in front of Congress, and he said that we're losing the ability to sufficiently deter because this is now, he described it as an epidemic. Other people at the hearing described it as a tsunami, and the Secret Service is describing this now as a critical national security concern because of the additional organized crime that it's spawning. You can see here the fraud losses that are reported to the FBI, and it looks like a skyrocket or a hockey stick. It's 15-fold growth in fraud losses since 2014 over the last 10 years. And these are reported numbers now, but you can see the vector as reported to the FBI. Then let's talk about some numbers. And remember, I was a CIA analyst, so if I get a little too geeky here, you'll have to forgive me. It's my inner geekiness coming out. But I've looked a lot at the numbers because data matters. When you look at the number of victims annually, about 700,000 report to the FTC each year, and about 900,000 report to the FBI. But one of the first things that Stop Scams Alliance did was go to the Gallup organization in September of 2023, and they did a poll for us, the first ever Gallup poll on scams, by the way. And when they did a poll, they found that 21 million Americans said they had been scammed in the last year. So that shows you the amount of underreporting on this. It's about, we think, 3 or 4% report to the FBI or the FTC, and the rest don't. So that's why Gallup said 21 million people, which, by the way, is the size of the state of Florida. It's a very big number. It's 57,000 people a day. On the annual losses side, about 10 billion reported to the FTC, 12.5 billion reported to the FBI. But the FTC did a study, they've done it twice now, where they estimate, in fact, in their studies, they assume either a 2% or a 6.7% reporting rate, depending on the amount of loss. In other words, the larger the amount, the more likely it is that people will report it. And when they do their math, they came out with about $158 billion. So now you're talking about the annual revenues of Citigroup or Home Depot. It's a very, very large number. And I just put at the bottom there, we're hamstrung a little bit as a nation because the Census Bureau, which is the gold standard when it comes to crime reporting, hasn't done a survey on fraud since 2017. But I'm pleased to tell you that they've signed up to do one. They plan to do one in the spring of 2025, which will be good news because we need good data. And then I just put this in there. I mentioned 57,000 people a day. Just think about it. That's 40 a minute, or 1, 2, 3. During those 3 seconds, 2 people in the United States of America were scammed. It's horrific what's going on, really. Who are the perpetrators? The FBI just this week put out a report saying that the scams that originated in Southeast Asia are spreading around the globe. They now see them not only in Southeast Asia, but also the Middle East, Africa, South America. There's been scam compounds recently, just in the last year, detected in Sri Lanka, in Peru, in Dubai. And then I just listed on the left sort of the prominent countries that I see when I do analysis of this and just look at the FBI and Interpol reports. Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, India, Nigeria come up more often than any other country. But as the map here shows, it's really spreading around the world now because this call center scam thing is so lucrative. There's so much money in it. And let me just leave you with this, a little vignette. The Economist did a study. In fact, this map came from The Economist, by the way. They did a podcast recently, and they interviewed a guy who escaped from one of the scam camps in Myanmar. And he said that every day before the scammers begin their work to scam Americans out of their life savings, there's a guy who gets up in the front of the room and he leads them all in a chant. And the chant goes like this: cripple the economies of the US and Europe. Just think about that. Every day before they begin their work, they're saying, let's cripple the economies of the US and Europe. That's the kind of war we're in. And the future does not look optimistic, frankly. Artificial intelligence, while it can be used for defensive purposes too, and I do see some signs of that, unfortunately, the bad guys in their use of artificial intelligence is likely to outweigh the defensive advantages in the near future anyway. And then as we increasingly adopt fast payments in this country, that too comes with an increased risk of fraud because it allows criminals to offshore their ill-gotten gains more quickly. Cryptocurrency also is a big threat vector, and the FBI data shows really astonishing growth in cryptocurrency scams in recent years. And then another factor, while it's good news that the UK and Australia are raising their defenses, it's good news for them, but we already see signs that the bad guys are seeing defenses going up in the world, and they're increasingly targeting the United States of America. There at the bottom of this slide, I put a quote from the Secret Service saying that other jurisdictions implement new anti-scam defenses. Criminals are shifting their activity to target U.S. citizens and financial institutions. And the reason they know this, by the way, is that criminals are telling Secret Service informants this. The UK has said, let's make the UK the safest place in the world to be online. And Australia is these are politicians now saying our goal is to make Australia one of the hardest targets in the world for scammers. I'm looking forward to the day when the United States will be able to make the same pledge. So let me just tell you to set the stage of what the UK and Australia are doing. Or Andrew, I don't know, you may want to stop and ask questions at this point.
Well, either way, I mean, I figure this is sort of where we're going. So why don't we got a couple of questions that came in. I mean, one thing I was just going to sort of, my comment here on what you've been talking about would be, I assume that since, folks have logged into this, they're sort of not thinking in terms of blaming victims or that kind of thing. But sometimes you still hear that kind of language. And one of the things that thinking about all of these overseas criminal gangs being the perpetrators helps remind me of is that, when you think about sort of scams to me conjures up sort of like little Johnny down the street doing something, and it just got a little bit out of hand. But when you're thinking about compounds run by criminal gangs in another country whose sole purpose is to steal the money of folks in developed countries like the United States, that feels very different and demands a very different response, as I think we're gonna talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I really have come to believe this is mainly a foreign organized crime threat. The official British statement is that they think that 70% of these cyber crimes are coming from overseas. The US government hasn't said so officially, but I tell you, I talk to a lot of people in the government and they tell me they use words like vast majority, 90%, so people in the know in the government, in the US government know this is mainly a foreign organized crime threat.
So one of the questions is, can we touch on some of the things the UK and Australia are doing? That's the next set of slides. So once I go off, you will get the answer to that. We got another one about the slides. Slides are we'll do that sort of. We'll type it to you, but they're available on the website where you logged in. You just touched on this a little bit. Are there a large amount of scams happening within North America, or is it mainly an overseas phenomenon?
You mean the victims of scams?
No, I think they mean, are there perpetrators within North America, or are they
Oh,
pretty much exclusively overseas at this point?
well, I am sure that there are some perpetrators in the U.S. That is to be sure. So, but the perpetrators I see mostly in the U.S. are engaged in fraud against institutions or against the government, that kind of thing. There's also money mules. So, in other words, when a Indian crime gang tries to get money out of grandma in California, I'm now describing my mom, there is a money mule involved, or at least a drop box in a location for people to pick up the cashier's check. So yes, there are criminals here in the U.S., but the kingpins for these types of crimes tend to be overseas.
One of our investigators calls out that Dubai needs to be on the list, and I heard you say it, but just getting a call out from one of our investigators. And then so we have a question from a small firm chief compliance officer. Can you provide practical steps we can take when a client requests a fund disbursement that is unusual, but the client insists the reason is legitimate and there are no indications of diminished capacity? So we don't even suspect financial exploitation at the time. It's usually only in hindsight that we discover the client concealed the real reason for the funds. And Ken, I'll come to you in a minute. One of the first things that comes to mind that I've heard about here is, usually, sometimes it's just one big you have 400,000 to give, and you're going to give 400,000 right away. And there's just one, sort of the money goes in one, um, at one time. But a lot of times, there are multiple, it goes over multiple transfers. And so one of the most effective things that I've heard is, ask them that first time is like, okay, well, do you expect to have any future needs for this, right? Because if it's a romance scam, if it's a government impersonation scam, if it's one of those kinds of scams, they're expecting that this is the last of it. They're expecting to be paid back. They're expecting, they're not expecting that there's going to be another story in another week or another 2 weeks where they're going to have to come back. So then they tell you no. And then when they come back in 2 weeks, you have a pretty good indication that even if they're telling you everything is legitimate, that it's not. So that's one of, that's not going to catch everything, but that's one of my favorite practices that I've heard about to try to deal with the situation that the questioner was asking about. Ken, I don't know if you want to add to that or add.
Yeah, so this is not really my area of expertise, and I know that SEC has a whole list of red flags, and there's groups in banking industry that's coming up with observations like you just made, Andrew. But let me just tell you the story of my mom because it's illustrative, I think. She was coached. Okay, when you go to the bank's going to ask you what you need the money for. And remember, this is a law enforcement matter. You can't divulge to them the real story here. You have to tell them that this is for a home renovation. And later on, Ms. Westbrook, you need to tell them it's for the purchase of a pickup truck. And so the criminals are coaching victims, and you all know this, that to make up a lie when they go to the bank. What in the case of my mom, what ultimately broke the spell was when she was telling the bank on the criminal's instructions that the money was for a home renovation, and the bank teller looked it up and found out that the cashier's check was going to a business that didn't exist. And so that finally helped her understand that this wasn't really on the up and up.
Yep. Yep. No, I think that's right. That's where I like the one question of do you expect future needs, because at that point they probably don't.
Right.
And so it helps you get around some of that coaching a little bit, but there's unfortunately we are facing an adaptive and intelligent enemy, and they are good at coaching these victims. And one of the things you and I have talked about before is just that I didn't think about until I started doing more of this is, by the time your mom was getting that money out, or by the time anybody is, how many times have they been on the phone? How much contact has happened to the point that, sometimes the phrase I use is that they're under it's almost like they're under a spell because there's just been so much contact. It's really difficult to break out.
Yeah. Yeah. The criminals actually call it putting the victim under the ether. That's exactly what they try to do. They're brainwashing people.
So this, I don't, you mentioned money mules earlier. We have a question about that. How do scammers enlist money mules here in the US? In my experience, a lot of times money mules are, in the cases I've seen, they're victims they don't have anything left to give. And so that's the way in which they're able to continue giving, is that now they become a money mule. I don't know if that's consistent with what you've seen, but that's in the cases that we've looked at. That's sort of what it appears to me, at least.
Yeah, well, in some cases, the money mules are unwitting, which is to say they think that they're doing a delivery job or something, and they're really picking up cash to deliver to criminals. So there's witting and unwitting money mules.
Agreed. So, question about statistics or data on U.S. citizens who live abroad and are residents of foreign jurisdictions that become victims of scams. What resources are there for them to report other than, so can an American in Germany, obviously they can report to local German police, but are there sort of American resources that they can access as well? Is I think the question here. And I think,
Yeah.
in a certain sense, we'll get to that later in terms of the fact that there's not one place that these reports go, but
Right. Yeah, the main places are the main when people come to me and say, where do I report? I tell them local police, FBI, and FTC. Those are sort of the main places. You can go report to other people too, as I have a slide later that shows this, but those are the main places. So if I were living in Germany and were a scam victim, I think I would report to the local police and also the FBI if I'm a U.S. citizen.
All right, so we have, I think, one more, and then we promise to get to um, the what the UK and Australia are doing, so we shouldn't delay too long. But do you foresee a time when banks have more ability to share information between banks when money is in flight? And yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, so I do think so. As I understand it, I've talked to a lot of banks, and they all want to share more information. Some of them think that they're being hamstrung by regulations that aren't clear enough about what they can share under what circumstances. But if to the extent that there's any confusion about the regulations, I think that should be, I'm going to be optimistic here and think that should be able to be cleared up in the next year or two, because the banks, as I said, do want to share more information to stop these crimes. So the banks have lobbying power. They can go to the right regulatory agencies in the Congress to get the rules written to allow them to do that. I don't see why not. It's not like the banks are saying we don't want to share. They actually want to share, but they need to make sure that they won't be sued if they do so.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna disappear again and let you tell us about Australia and the UK. I think in the reverse order, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Well, just to set the stage here, let me describe a little bit about what you're going to see in Australia and UK. And this first slide that I'm showing now is just all scams are not equal. Some are more injurious and costly than others, according to the data that we have from the FBI. Excuse me. I think from my observation, the US government in the past has focused a lot on the right-hand side of this chart. We consider ransomware a national security issue. The White House has all kinds of task forces to squash ransomware. Victims and dollar amount losses are going down, down, down as a result of this focus. Identity theft, too, we pay a lot of attention to, and credit card theft. But look at the left side of this chart. That's where the real money is flowing out. It's investment fraud, it's business email compromise that affect businesses, and tech support scam. Those are number one, two, three, according to the FBI. So as you'll see in a minute, the UK and Australia put a lot of attention on the left-hand side of this chart, which I think is appropriate. Another area of focus when you can't do everything. You have to choose what you focus on. And so another concept that I'd like to introduce is left of boom and right of boom, which those of you who are in the military will perhaps recognize. And it has to do with, do you do preventive things on the left-hand side to block, disrupt, prevent, or do you focus more attention on the arrest, seizure, victim support side of the equation, and then education is kind of in the middle of this. As you'll see in the next slides, the British government and Australian governments are focused heavily on the left-hand side of this chart. The British government has made a big investment on the right-hand side of this chart by hiring additional fraud investigators. But the Aussies in particular are left pretty much exclusively, although they do a lot of education also. So to just dive into the British government, you remember after my mom was scammed in February of 2023, I was told there's just nothing we can do. And then I read in May of 2023 the British strategy, and that's when I said, hey, shoot, there's a lot we can do here. And if you haven't read it, it's online. It's a great piece of work, I think. They've done a lot of work. So they have three pillars. It's left of boom, center, and right. Pursue the fraudsters is on the right side of the chart. Blocking frauds at the source is the left side of the chart. And then empowering the British people to recognize, avoid, and report. They have invested now 400 million pounds. So that's like, what, 600 or 700 million US dollars. They are seeing reductions in fraud as a result of that. So these are statistics now I'm showing from UK Finance, a British trade organization, and their tracking of fraud cases in the UK. And then you'll see on the right side of the chart the FBI data. So they seem to believe that they are making progress, and we don't seem to be doing so. So what are they doing? What's the secret? Why do they think that fraud cases and dollar losses are going down in the UK? The first thing I would point to is a left of boom thing to identify and take down fraudulent websites. They have a significant effort to collect data from the British population and from BT, Vodafone, TalkTalk. The process is managed by the National Cybersecurity Center, which is an arm of GCHQ. And if you don't know GCHQ, that's the equivalent of the National Security Agency, NSA, in this country. So 20,000 reports a day, one every 5 seconds, people are reporting suspicious looking emails and URLs. And then the British government blocks them or takes them down at scale. And most recently, about a year ago, they created a program called Share and Defend. They used to have a website blocking mechanism available to the government and then to businesses. Well, in the spring of last year, they allowed this to be used by the average citizen via ISPs in the UK. And what happens here is BT, Vodafone, TalkTalk, and the government and banks actually feed data into the system, and that feeds a blacklist that then helps protect people from malicious URLs, which is one avenue of attack. Another thing they do is to focus very heavily on cryptocurrency scams. One of the features of cryptocurrency scams is that victims are enticed to put money into what turns out to be a fake website. Well, these fake websites can be discovered. The first victim can report this, for example, and then the government can act on that and take it down. And in the UK, they say they're taking them down at scale. You can see there was a spike in 2021, and ever since then, they've found fewer and fewer of these sites because they're so aggressively taking them down. And they say that the median time that one of these things is up is about an hour now. They act very, very quickly. On the right side of the chart, you'll see the FBI statistics on crypto investment scams in red, and then overall investment scams in gray, black. And you'll see that we don't seem to be bending the curve there. Another thing they do, which is a left of boom thing, is to block foreign phone calls. If we all agree that most of these crimes are perpetrated by foreigners, and many of them, not all, but many of them are done over the phone. Because why are they done over the phone? Because you can create a sense of urgency more over the phone than you can with a text message. So a lot of criminals like to get people on the phone because you can put people's hair on fire that way. Well, there's now 19 countries in the world that have, in recognition of this threat, they block inbound international calls that spoof a domestic number. So, for example, if a call is coming from India and it's pretending to be from Seattle, the call would be blocked. So 19 countries in the world now do this, and they're reporting pretty significant successes, like I'm showing here, 65% or 72% reductions in complaints, but also call volumes dropped. When India turned this on last October, they saw a 90% reduction in inbound international calls, because that's the number of spoofed calls coming into India. Taiwan 70%, Finland 60%. And just as an asterisk on Finland, when Finland in 2022 started to block inbound international calls that spoofed or pretending to be a number coming from Finland, the tech support scam collapsed. Why? Because the tech support scam, like happened to my mom, The whole point of the tech support scam is to get people to call a 1-800 number. You're now talking to criminals in India, and they set your hair on fire and get you to move money out of your bank. And if you can't do that, or if mom, if her phone had said the call was from India instead of from Seattle, that might very well have saved her. Another thing that now 3 or 4 countries around the world are doing is they're authenticating financial advertisements. Financial advertisements are a particular risk. I'm showing one here on the left with a well-known actor in the UK saying, I've got a cryptocurrency investment for you, right? So people fall into these things, believing the well-known figure. So Google has struck a deal with the UK and also Australia, Singapore, and Taiwan, whereby in order to place a financial ad on the Google platform, it has to be the placer of the ad has to be on a government authorized list. So now a scammer has a really hard time placing a financial ad in the UK, Australia, Singapore, and Taiwan. And Google brags about this on their own website. They've seen a pronounced decline in reports of ads promoting financial scams, they say. Meta, for its part, started in 2024 to do the same thing in the UK. They've rolled it out now to Taiwan, and Australia is kicking in this month. So with Meta, they have the same kind of policies for UK, Taiwan, and Australia to authenticate financial ads because of the risks of these things. And the question for me is, why doesn't the US government ask Google and Meta to do the same thing in the United States of America to protect our citizens? I've never gotten an answer to that. So turning to Australia, they too are reporting significant declines in fraud. The chart here shows a 13% decline in reported losses. Actually, I don't have a chart that shows it, but the scam czar in Australia last week put out a report saying that he thinks it's actually 40%. So if I had a chart of that, a visual, I would show you that. But it's significant in Australia. They claim that reported losses are down significantly, whereas again, our losses are going up, up, up. So what are they doing? Well, the scam czar in Australia, his name is Stephen Jones, and he gave a really great interview where he was asked a question when he was attending a conference in London. The reporter asked him, why is it that scam losses seem to be going down in Australia? And he answered the question. So, and I just summarized his answer here by saying the first thing he always points to is the establishment of a national anti-scam center, which fuses public and private data so they have a better understanding of the scam picture, the scam ecosystem. The second thing they did was they empowered what's called ASIC, that's the equivalent of our SEC, to pull down fraudulent investment websites. Just like I showed you with the UK, they also focus on taking down the false fake investment websites. They also have blocking of phone calls. I described to you earlier the blocking of international calls, SMS messages. They have authentication mechanisms there. So they're really focusing on telecom threats and creating ways to stop those. And then turning to the banking sector, he mentioned friction to slow payments like warnings and payment delays so you can't make very large withdrawals all at one time, and limits for suspicious transactions. And then we mentioned money mules earlier. So what the Australians are really trying to focus heavily on identifying, closing down money mule accounts, strong controls for online account opening. What that means is in Australia, at the end of last year, in December 2024, the rule is that you have to have biometric authentication for opening an online account. Whereas in the US, we don't tend to do that very often, is in my understanding. So they have much stronger controls to prevent money mules from getting away with. They have to provide biometric information, which allows an opportunity to catch them if they are in fact a money mule. So here's a picture of the National Anti-Scam Center, and this is a future state. It's not all built out yet. They have some of these nodes, but not all of them. The idea is you have law enforcement reporting in, you have regulators, you have consumer groups, you have banks, telcos, social media. All of the places that have scam threat intelligence are now reporting what they're allowed to report from a regulatory standpoint. They don't send the whole bank's information, of course. They just send what's allowed to be shared to a national anti-scam center. And then they have the fusion center there and the expertise to make sense of it. Because scams go across platforms, so they have their law enforcement people, they have bankers, they have social media people in order to understand the threat picture. And it's also, by the way, it serves as a hub for education. In the US, our education tends to be quite splintered. Every agency of the government has their education. A lot of banks have their education. Well, in Australia, they're trying to centralize that so there's one place to go for if you want to be educated, you can go to the National Anti-Scam Center. They too focus very heavily, just like the UK does, on taking down those fraudulent investment websites. Here's an announcement in August of 2024 where ASIC, remember that's the SEC, is bragging about their website takedown actions. And they talk about 7,300 phishing and investment scam websites they've taken down. And they claim, the latest claim from the Australian government is that investment scam losses have decreased by 35% year over year from 2023 to 2024. So that seems to be making a dent. And then just to summarize, we've talked about a number of things here, and this is a chart that summarizes all this. Both the UK and Australia have a national strategy. They both have someone in charge. In the UK, it's the Home Minister, and in Australia, it's the Deputy Secretary for the Treasury. They do annual surveys on fraud, whereas I mentioned earlier, the last time the US did one was 2017. They do nationwide public education, and I mean like they take over the airways for a week or two and give scam tips to their population. They have centralized fraud reporting in like a national anti-scam center, or in the UK, in the London's UK's case, they're building a capability called Action Fraud to do that. I mentioned the blocking of inbound international calls that spoof domestic numbers. I didn't talk about it much, but there's mechanisms in both the UK and Australia to authenticate a text message such that if you get a text message that says Bank of America, it's really from Bank of America and the bad guys cannot spoof that. Fraudulent website takedowns, I mentioned public-private partnership. They have mechanisms for that we just don't. Boosting law enforcement resources. I mentioned earlier, the UK is adding 400 investigators. Now, this is on top of a base of 100. So they're going from 100 to 500, which is a very significant investment in fraud investigators at the national level. And I ask, and I'll bet you there's fewer than 50 in the United States of America at the national level. And then investment. So UK says that they've invested about 500 million US dollars, Australia about 100 million US dollars. And in both cases, so the bottom line here is it seems as if for a few $100 million, we too could bend the curve if we chose to do so. And we may want to stop there and give people the opportunity to do your verification code in case you're interested in doing that.
So here is your verification code if you're going to do CE 774394. We got one request, Ken, I think it's on your computer, if we can turn off that turn on reactions. I know we had, just X out of it, it'd be perfect. I know it keeps coming back, so it probably will again, but.
I have tried, I click on this and it just will not go away.
Yeah. Now our questioner knows that we tried. So, and then we have had a series of questions come in. It occurred to me that I had one from the first part that I thought you might want to comment on. And that was, you mentioned that I think it was the Secret Service called this a national security threat. Do you want to call out why exactly? Right? I think a lot of us think of this as, okay, somebody lost money and that's tragic and we don't want that to happen. But how do you sort of take the step to national security threat?
Well, so it was Matt Noyes, who is the cyber director for the Secret Service, and he was testifying in front of the House Financial Services Committee, and he said that it's a national security concern because we see the criminals taking this money and plowing it back into more organized crime, more money laundering, more ransomware. So in other words, we've created a machine here where the U.S. is funding organized criminals that are then using it to attack our citizens again. So that was his take on it, and I agree with that actually. When a citizens are being attacked to the tune of 21 million people and 158 billion dollars a year. And remember earlier, I told you the scammers in Southeast Asia begin their day by saying, cripple the economies of the US and Europe. I mean, I view that as an attack on the United States of America, and I don't think that's an exaggeration.
No, and to just emphasize the point again, I mean, I think it really goes to the point of refocusing the way we think about this from little Johnny down the street to an attack, an organized attack by international criminals on the US middle class. Um, so we got a couple of questions about sort of, are there opportunities at the federal level to get more attention to this, to do more with this? Got a question about, what do you think about, have you had interaction with the current administration and their sort of receptivity to this? But I don't know how you want to take those various questions, but there's, I think, a lot of interest in why you think that third column of the U.S. is completely blank.
So why it is now blank, for a variety of reasons. I would just start with, we don't have good measurements. You remember I told you the Census Bureau is the gold standard for measuring crime in this country, and they haven't measured fraud since 2017. So we don't have a national level poll of how big the problem is. We do have this one Gallup poll, and I'm raising money, by the way, for a new Gallup poll that will go into more depth. But our policymakers don't have the data to show how big the problem is. So they just have these anecdotes that they're dealing with. And we do have victim reports, but that's a very, think of an iceberg. We're only seeing 3 or 4% of the iceberg, and 96 or 7 of the percent of that iceberg is underwater. We just don't see it. So that's part of the problem, I think. And plus, I don't think people have think of it as a national security threat yet. I do, but most people don't have the data, and they think it is Johnny down the street. And then a third point I would make is that most policymakers, even if you get past, okay, this is a big problem and it's coming from overseas, the next question is, well, what do we do about it? There's nothing we can do, that we can't go arrest these guys. Well, so what I've just been trying to show you is things that the Australian and the UK government are doing, but all of what I'm showing you is a little bit technical and complicated. So it takes some time now to absorb that we can do left of boom things and interfere with the ability of the criminals to set up websites and to engage in telecommunications with us, and that those are effective, because most people think they're not effective or impossible to do somehow. So you have to get through that. As for whether am I optimistic or not, I'm doing my darndest to get this on the agenda of the new administration. I'm getting good handshakes from people, even at the White House level and some agencies. So I'm going to keep working, and it's not a done deal by any means. It's still a back burner issue in the U.S. government. I'm trying to get it to the front burner in a place where we have a lot of front burner issues that we're dealing with. So there's a challenge there.
Sort of a follow-up that's specific. Are there any political or practical reasons why call spoofing, and I think international call spoofing specifically, can't be ended in the U.S.?
Politically, yeah. So the issue is that everything I'm talking about costs money. Who's going to pay for it? So when it comes to, we could easily, from a regulator, you wouldn't even have to pass a law or a regulation to do this. It's within the FCC's authority to say we're going to start blocking international calls that spoof a domestic number. But this would cost the telecoms a lot of money to do. So now there's the question of, well, how are we going to recover those costs? And that hasn't been sorted out yet. So, my proposition is that the cost benefit ratio is very lopsided. The costs are minimal and the savings to society are large. And there are studies that I can point to in Ireland and the UK that show that. But again, that's the problem is somebody has to pay for these things, and who's that going to be?
Um, Specific question about one of the specific things you mentioned. When they take down websites, are they contacting domain registrars, web hosts to do that, or are they contacting internet service providers? Do they get court orders? Do you know how, ASIC and others are doing that?
Yes, so they do it in the US. You have to get a well, you can do it one of two ways. You can try to contact the domain order and make the case that that's fraudulent, it should be shut down. Or in the case of if you're in law enforcement, you have to, so the first option is available to private people. If you're in law enforcement, you have to get a court order, as I've been told. The UK and Australia are doing this judicially. They are not getting court orders to do it. They are analyzing the website, showing that it's fraudulent, and then going to either the domain or increasingly the ISP to block it. In the UK, it's the ISP.
Um, so that would require, for us, would require a law change to be able to.
Probably, yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, that's what I'm told by law enforcement people.
Yeah.
This now that I don't know that. I have talked to DOJ and asked them, what do you think? Is this something that would be within your rules to do without a court order? And I haven't got an answer to that. But you're probably right. It probably would require a law.
So sticking with Australia for a minute, can you talk more about federal state cooperation in Australia, which has a similar federal scheme to the US?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer that. I just don't know. Don't know.
Okay. I don't either. So, all right. Have either Australia or the UK had any focus or success on recovery of lost funds, right of boom, as part of its strategy?
Yeah, I know Australia does. The scams are there talks about this quite a bit. Of part of the National Anti-Scam Center is to try to intercept scams as they're occurring and to warn victims. Now the U.S. does this too. In fact, there was a very good announcement just last week from the FBI saying that they've intercepted thousands of people and warned them that they are in the middle of being scammed and have saved them before the scam actually unfolds, which is a wonderful story. Um, so that
So,
ideally, yes, if you have the intelligence to understand the cryptocurrency exchanges and to see patterns of a scam and then to warn the victims, that's a great left of boom thing to do. And the U.S. is starting to do that just this year, which is cool.
so, and I don't know if you know this from some of the sort of interviews with former call center folks, but somebody wants to know, how does a foreign fraudster manage to overcome the language barrier? How do they pretend to be from Seattle when they're presumably speaking of accented English, as I think probably what's underlying the question.
Yeah. Well, so I think as far as I can tell, scams perpetrated against Americans over the phone typically come from countries that have English speakers. So think of Jamaica, think of Philippines, think of India. There's a lot of English speakers in India, Pakistan who work for U.S. companies, whatever. So typically today, it's the English speakers abroad are scamming English speakers here. And that's I read, for example, in Switzerland, the scammers there tend to be from Poland, for whatever reason. So, however, with AI increasingly in the future, it's not going to be very long before you could be in North Korea and not speak a word of English and appear to be speaking Midwestern English. So that's going to increase the threat vector enormously, I think, with AI's translation capabilities.
We did get a question, and I apologize to the questioner that I didn't clock it when it came in quite enough to know exactly it's, have you seen AI deepfakes on the rise to get around? And it ends this aspect. I think it might be the blocking of inbound international calls, but I'm not sure exactly which of the things. Like I said, I didn't quite clock it at the right time to know what aspect precisely of the UK Australia initiatives. It was asking about AI deepfakes to get around. And so that may just be a question where we need the questioner to clarify, and we'll come back to it.
Well, we do see deep fakes. I mean, there's a famous case in Hong Kong, just I think 6 months ago, where a deep fake impersonated the CFO of a company, and the company ended up losing, I don't know, I think 25 million or 40 million dollars. It was amazing, because the deep fake was so good. It convinced the finance department that the CFO was asking for a money transfer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're on the cusp of that really having a harmful effect.
Are there ways the average American citizen can somehow access the types of deterrence these other countries have in place instead of waiting on the US government?
Oh boy. No, I'm sorry. I think that these are national level US government kinds of things to do. The one thing to think about is all of these things that I'm showing on this chart are part of cyber defenses that we often use for companies. When you have a company or the U.S. government, you have blacklists and you have whitelists to you keep the bad websites out of your domains because you have threat intelligence that you're using to stop the malicious domains. There's call blocking so that you're not overwhelmed with calls. So what we don't have these things that we're doing for companies for people yet, and that's what we need to do. And it's going to cost a lot of money to do. Hundreds of millions.
And we may get to this later in the presentation. I have heard you talk about some, company level initiatives, a bank rolling out the ability to have a "Are you calling me?" button, for example.
Right.
It's not really an answer to this question, but it's sort of related, I guess, in my mind.
Well, it is. It's in the area of authentication. A lot of the things that you see on this chart are either authentication, like I'm showing in the case of text messages, and do I have advertisements on this chart? If I don't, so that's another way of authentication. So you're authenticating the good stuff. And then you have some blocking things too, because no matter how well you authenticate, the bad stuff's going to get through. So to me, there's authentication and blocking. And what Andrew just referred to is on the authentication side, one of the threat vectors is when people try to call their bank, but they call a spoofed number or a malicious ad on Google that turns out to be the wrong number. And now they're talking to criminals. So what the UK has done, and also Australian banks are doing this, the banks are building a way for you to log into your banking application and ask the question, are you calling me right now? And the bank will tell you yes or no, we're on the phone with you right now, which is a cool way of verifying that. Also, in the UK, there's a number 159 that you can call and be reliably transferred to your bank. Whereas in the US, you have to be on guard, and people sometimes are tricked into calling the wrong number. They think they're talking to their bank, and they're really not.
Okay, so I just saw another question come in about the slides. You can also look in the chat. There is a link directly to the slides in the chat. Okay, you mentioned ads, and we got a question about them. In any countries, has Google restricted the use of certain ad words? For example, fraudulent crypto platforms use the name of regulated, registered crypto platforms as their ad words. I've seen cases where the use of AdWords has allowed the fraudulent websites to appear as the first search result when someone is searching for the legitimate crypto platform.
Yeah, I cannot answer that. That's a little bit too detailed for me. I know. So what I said earlier was that in the UK and Australia, the financial ads are you have to be on a whitelist to place a financial ad. So that then leads to the question, well, what is a financial ad exactly? And what happens here is Google made up a definition of what a financial ad is. It includes, for example, insurance. So it's quite a broad definition, as I understand it, but I don't know whether it goes into the particular words that you're now mentioning.
Okay. Um, there's a question. Can you explain examples of friction to slow roll ACH transfers of funds? I don't, is that?
Yeah, so um, the US is now doing this too. I don't think this is unique to UK and Australia, but a lot of banks now are building in when there's a large transaction, there may be a checklist. Do you know the sender? Do you know who asked you to do this? The bank makes you answer a number of questions before you're able to do the transfer. And in fact, I've seen one example where there's one bank in Australia that if you answer, uh, is this money for a Facebook marketplace transaction? And if you answer that yes, the next thing that pops up is this is probably a fraud. We're not going to allow you to make the transaction. So those are the kinds of warnings and frictions that some banks are now starting to build in.
Um, okay. We still have, um, so there's a question, this may be more a technical question than, but why can't scammers have a domestic phone line and then route their foreign calls to the domestic line to get around a sort of no spoofing law?
Yeah. Okay. So I need to have a good answer to that. I've been asked that before. Other people say, "What about voice over internet protocol? Couldn't they do that?" And I think part of the answer is whatever measures, all these measures I'm showing here, none of them are silver bullets in themselves. None of them are 100%. What these measures are intended to do is, think of, you have a lock on your door on your house probably. And the reason for that lock is not to be impermeable. A bad guy with a battering ram could open your door. The purpose of the lock is to get the criminals to go somewhere else. You can't stop everything, and it's nothing here is 100%. But if you can make it hard enough for them, they're going to go somewhere else. And I showed you earlier, the criminals are seeing defenses going up in UK and Australia and Malaysia, and the criminals are telling the Secret Service that increasingly the US is the softest target. So that's why I think we need to start building these kinds of defenses. None of them are 100%.
The question from earlier was around deepfaking those authorized to advertise on the web.
Mhm.
So getting around, I think, like Google's authorized financial advertisers list, for example.
Well, I'm sure I'll just stipulate any measure we propose, there will be ways for the criminals to get around them. They are very um, they're very smart people. They're PhDs on the criminal side working on getting around these things. So whatever we do, they'll be able to get around it. I'll go back to the lock on the door thing.
Right. So do you have thoughts on paid tools like LifeLock, Careful, or Aura for reducing scam risks for seniors?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I am aware of those things, and I don't know, they seem to be good to me. One
So,
thing, one thing for seniors though, as long as we're on this topic, is I don't know if everybody knows, the threat of malicious ads is so great so what malicious ads can do is to put malware on your computer without clicking on it, by the way. And the FBI recommends the use of ad blocking software to Americans, and so does the Secret Service. And nobody knows this. I don't think anybody on this call, I don't know if anybody would know that, but both the FBI and Secret Service recommend the use of ad blocking software.
um, okay. And we may get back to ad blocking. I think we have one more. We have a bunch more questions, but we'll do one more question, and we may do a few more slides at least for a couple minutes. So, what impact to changes to UK liability rules, um, or how have they impacted fraud prevention efforts by financial institutions? UK's payment systems regulator requires banks to reimburse victims of authorized push payment fraud within a few days.
Correct. So the UK, I think in October, requires banks to reimburse fraud victims of authorized push payment fraud. And the way they're doing it is they split it 50-50 between the sending bank and the receiving bank. I don't have data yet on how effective that has been. I do know that it's encouraged the British banks to point their fingers upstream at telcos and social media, saying the fraud's coming from you guys. Why are we being held liable? So I know that's going on. Australia is taking a different path, by the way. Their law that is, it may have even been passed today. The Senate met on it. Their law spreads liability more broadly across the fraud ecosystem. It's banks, social media, and telcos all taking some part of the blame. I don't know how exactly that's all going to work, but Australia is not going down the road yet of putting liability on the banks solely. And I think it's too early to know the effect of this. I know that some people say that this will lead to fraud by people pretending to be scammed and to get their money back on money that really wasn't stolen at all. There's that has to be guarded against.
So I said we were going to jump back to slides. Do we have the same tools that the UK has to block these websites and phone numbers? And so I think trying to get at, what are a different way of saying that is what are the impediments again that we're.
Well, we certainly have the technology. We are very adept at technology in the United States of America. It's not a technology thing. It's just we don't have the will, and we're not willing to spend the money yet to do it. So again, there's cost benefit to this, and I think that the costs are worth the benefits of these blocking things that I'm showing here. But if you ask the company, they're just looking at the cost side of the equation. They don't, what benefit is it to a telco to block international calls? They don't really see the benefits on the other side very much. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to raise the alarm, show the cost analysis, the ROI, and then to build the pressure to get us to start doing it.
Okay, I'm gonna go through a couple more of these questions. Why don't you head through the next couple of slides while I do that?
All right. So the next is different things to show you that along the same lines here, I think. So there's the verification code. So we talked earlier about where do people report. And up on the top left there is report fraud, ftc.gov, which is one place you can report. Oh, guess what? The FTC has two websites. They have identitytheft.gov too, and you can report there. So when I was reporting my mom's fraud, my brother was doing it, and the first question he asked was, well, which one do I go to? Because they got two. And then you have the FBI's website, which is not called FBI, by the way, it's called IC3, which is another source of confusion. Then you have police agencies, and it does involve the phone, then it's the FCC. Justice Department has theirs. You got the Senate Aging Committee, you got CFTC, you got SEC, 50 attorneys general. I mean, in my mom's case, I think we counted up 18 places we reported it to, just to try to be, I wanted to make sure that we reported everybody we should, and it turned out to be a lot of work, believe me. And most people just won't do that. So as for what the United States should do about it, this is the way I think about it. We need a national whole of government strategy. This is not an easy thing to do. It's complex, lots of moving parts. So whenever you have a complex problem, you need a strategy with goals and metrics and resources. We can't boil the ocean. We can't do everything. So we're going to have to carefully choose how to spend our resources and our targets to have the maximum effect on the bad guys. I think it should be White House led. There are some people in the White House who agree with me on that, but not enough. They haven't yet accepted this mantle. I think it needs to be cross government with all the agencies involved in a task force. The tech, telecom, financial, consumer groups need to be included in this because some of these are tech-enabled things that the tech community can fight and the White House can't. So we need to all cooperate. There needs to be public-private partnership. And I believe if we chose a focus, my argument would be that we need to focus on stopping scams at the source through centralized data fusion. Education and law enforcement are important too, but I really do think the focus should be on turning off the spigot and trying to stop the scam from happening in the first place. I think that, here's sort of the components of a strategy. I think there's at the organizational level in the federal government, there could be a presidential executive order that prioritizes this issue. A federal advisory commission is something that we often create when confronted with complex problems, and we haven't done one in this case. There could be a select committee to organize the Congress because the Congress, this falls between the cracks of so many committees on Capitol Hill. There needs to be some place where this comes together. We do, in the case of drug policy, have select committees where we do drug policy, but we don't have that for scams. We need to measure the problem. I mentioned the U.S. Census Bureau several times here. GAO also could get the various stovepipes in the government to talk to each other and come up with a composite picture. Enhanced public-private partnership is important. Centralized reporting. One model that I would tell you about is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We have in this country a data fusion center for missing and exploited children. The Department of Justice puts in about $40 million. The private sector puts in money too. And we have a fusion center, so we have a picture and can rescue kids who are kidnapped. We don't have that kind of thing for fraud, but I think we should. We should allow consumers to know with whom they're communicating. That's why I brought up the blocking of foreign phone calls earlier. We need to stop the spoofing of calls, text messaging, and social media, and there are tools to do that if we just spent the money to do so. I think we need to treat it as a national security threat and not as a Johnny down the block thing. The proper framing of this is we're under attack by foreign organized crime, and we need to fight back aggressively to stop the money from going back overseas so that they can hit us again. It needs to have increased law enforcement intelligence priority, and I think what the Australian and British governments do with national awareness on the airwaves is a good idea too. Should I keep going or more questions?
So we have a couple of questions that I was still sort of trying to organize from before, but I think, let's keep going. We had said 75 minutes at the outset. I think we're gonna, we're at about that time. I think we're gonna press on toward 90 and keep going if you're okay with it, Ken. And
I'm perfectly fine.
So I think just let's keep going for now, and then we'll try to sneak a couple more questions in the last couple of minutes.
All right. So this slide gets more, a lot of the people on this call are from the state level, and I put this slide together for the National Association of Attorneys General. I looked in the FTC Sentinel database, which is one of the main places to report in the US government, and they have a list of the contributors. And it turns out that fewer than half of our states share their information on fraud with the federal government. And I've talked to some of these attorneys general, and they say it's either because, we looked into that one time and just never followed through, or it's a money thing, we just don't want to spend the money, or in some cases they're afraid to give their data to the federal government. But for a variety of reasons, we're not sharing information across the United States. And just remember, my friends, the bad guys are organized and they collaborate. And if we don't do so, they're going to beat us. So that would be my story on that. And a point on crypto ATMs. This is an incredible threat that the FBI, you should see the FBI statistics on cryptocurrency scams. It's just going through the roof. In recognition of that, the UK banned crypto ATMs in 2022. California, for its part, passed a law that took effect on the 1st of January 2025. There's a $1,000 daily limit per person on crypto transactions. There's legislation that's being considered in half a dozen states to do the same kind of thing. I think, those of you at the state level should just ask, does my state have either registration or caps or bans, or what are we going to do about crypto ATM machines? Because what I'm showing here is a Federal Trade Commission graphic that says, did someone send you to a Bitcoin ATM? It's a scam.
I mean, I could just say that talking to some law enforcement that I'm associated with, it's hard to I'm associated with, that's what, but that I work with, it's hard to figure out why someone wants to use a crypto ATM rather than Coinbase, unless their purpose is not a purpose we want to facilitate, right? I mean, obviously scams are done that way. I understand from law enforcement that drug money can also be transmitted that way. Those aren't things that we as a society really want to perpetuate. And my understanding is that the fees on most of these ATMs are quite a bit higher. So again, the question is, why would I pay that fee versus, an online company's fee if I'm looking to buy cryptocurrency? And I don't have a good answer for that. But so we have a few minutes left. We can do a couple of questions, and then I don't know if you want to. We have sort of the tech support to that we could try to talk about, although we're running a little short. I don't know if you you want to try to sling that in 8 minutes, so one question that I didn't get you asked before is Bitcoin cryptocurrency attempting to create a traceable system, or any government regulations enforcing that? I thought that was the opposite of what cryptocurrency was about, but I'll pose the question to you.
Well, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency is all on the blockchain, and it's totally available to anybody. It's published on the internet. So the trick is to take this published information about where the transactions, now the transactions they try to hide them with many, many steps and confuse where the transaction actually originated and went to. But there's various companies, Chain Analysis is one company that specializes in identifying the nodes in cryptocurrency transactions and to be able to trace them. So there are tracing capabilities. You have to be sophisticated about it, but it is possible to do. Are the cryptocurrency exchanges or companies that know they don't want it to be traced? So that's probably not going to happen.
We did part of this, I think, earlier, but there's a question: how did the FBI notify people they were being scammed? Real time, email? I think this is when you were talking about sort of the friction and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so they did not describe that. They gave a number. I think it was like 4,000 people. They've been able to stop the scam, and then they said I think 75% of them did not know they were being scammed. Apparently, a quarter knew it by the time the FBI got to them. How did they do it? I do not know, and they did not disclose that.
So we have a question. I think it probably there's probably a little bit of a questioning tone that goes with it as it's written. So the U.S. has none of the initiatives of fraud deterrence in place like the UK and Australia have, as shown on the slide. I'm inferring the tone, but I think
to be generous, if I were to be as generous as possible, the best thing that I can tell you is what I just told you about the FBI intercepting some scams as they're underway. That's huge, and I applaud them for that. Another positive thing I would say is a tech industry initiative. Just a couple weeks ago, Microsoft announced a capability, the tech support scam that has a pop-up that takes over your computer. Well, this could be detected through AI, and Microsoft is actually doing that. They have a pilot program in the Microsoft Edge browser to detect the signs of that pop-up ad and to block it. And that's huge. So here you have American AI being used to defeat the bad guys' AI. And I love that. And we should do more of that.
Um, can you talk about how AML agencies are involved given their review of transactions and their relevant knowledge? Is that, you know,
Yeah, no, that's sort of outside of my area of expertise. I'm sorry.
yeah, I thought it might be, but wanted to. Okay. Um, Other than this session and others done by NASA, are there any other sources of education for all of us and seniors and vulnerable adults? Um, any that you're particularly fond of?
Well, so AARP has a lot of data out there on this, of course. The FTC's Sentinel database. One thing you can do is go to my website. I have on Stop Scams Alliance website, I have a tab called References, and that's curated information that I think is valuable. The best reports from the U.S. government, from private companies in the U.S. and also overseas. I have British and Australian reports there. So those are the ones that I'm fond of. They're on my website on the References tab.
Um, and FINRA and the SEC are ones that NASA often works with. All have um, items as well. Um, okay. Um, I um, the So, and someone just put in a new question, but it's that noting that FINRA has a dedicated senior helpline and information regarding scams. So we just covered that. Last couple of minutes, shall we do closing thoughts? Do you want to do a highlight on tech scams? How do you want to handle the last 5 minutes here?
Well, I could do a blitz on tech support scams if you want to. That'd be
Yeah,
fine.
let's. So
All right.
as Ken and I were sort of thinking about this, and he had some slides that he showed me on this. It sort of it brought a lot of what we talked about in the first slides together. So I think it's a great way to end the presentation. Apologies to anybody whose question we don't get to. So
This will be a little quick since time is running out, but the tech support scam is near and dear to my heart for a variety of reasons. One, this is the one that got my mom. Number two, it's the third costliest scam that is tracked by the FBI. And when it comes to people over the age of 60 in the United States of America, this is the number one scam reported to the FBI by far. It has double the number of victims of any other scam reported to the FBI. So this is a biggie. And one of the ways it happens is through typo squatting. So if you search for Amazon and you type it with two Z's, you get the tech support pop-up on your computer that takes over your computer and asks you to call a 1-800 number. This screen actually happened to the chairman of the board of my company, Stop Scams Alliance. She tried to spell anesthesiology and got it wrong because nobody can spell anesthesiology. So when she misspelled it, she got the right-hand side of her chart here, took over her computer, call a Windows security toll free. And if she had called that 1-855 number, she would have been talking to organized crime figures in India, and they are trained at taking your money. This screen happened to a friend of mine. He's a former lawyer from the U.S. Congress. So anybody who thinks this happens only to elderly people, this guy's not elderly. He's a smart guy. This happened to him on his computer. Call Windows support, and I did. They call that number, and I talked to the scammers for a while. And who are they? Here's a picture of them. There's a guy in the UK who specializes in hacking into their computers. It's a call center in India. That's where those 1-800 numbers are going, according to the FBI. Here's some statistics: double the number of victims reporting any other scam, billions of dollars of losses. That's just reported. If you added in the unreported amount, I'm sure we're talking 10 billion plus. The losses reported to the FBI has just skyrocketed, and they say it's coming from South Asia, mainly India. Microsoft just recently put out a report that talked about the dire state of tech scams. It's alarming. They talked about a 400% increase in what they're seeing in the Microsoft network. They saw a 12-fold increase, they say, in their data centers on this type of scams. And they say, where is it coming from? It's coming from malicious ads. So remember, a few minutes ago, I said use ad blocking software. Well, this is why, because there's so many malicious ads out there, and it's just skyrocketing. So how does it work? It starts with a malicious ad that delivers the pop-up on the left-hand side, number one. Then it goes to a spoof phone call. They want to get you on the phone to set your hair on fire. And then once you've done that, then they coax you either to install remote access software, or they use malicious code to do it for you. And now your computer is taken over, and the bad guys can see everything on your computer. They can steal the money right there, or they can, in my mom's case, they prevented her from using her computer, and then they convinced her that they were the only people she could trust, and they convinced her to go to the bank and start making transfers. And then after that, the scam is discovered at some point, and you got law enforcement. So now how do you fight this? How do you fight this? It's complicated, but if we could reduce the malicious ads and malicious URL threat, that would put a big dent in it. That's just money. It's better technology to detect that stuff, which we just haven't spent. Ad blockers, I mentioned, you can use AI to detect it, and in fact, Microsoft is starting to do so in the Edge browser now. So I'd like to talk to Google and Firefox, the other browsers, and Safari, and why aren't you guys doing it, right? I mentioned spoof phone calls before. We have to when someone is coaxed into installing remote access software, we have to warn them that it's running, and remote access software companies don't typically do that right now. So it runs on your computer forever, and it runs in the background, and you don't even know it's running. That's a crime. Then we need to be able to secure computers. We need to have better browser and operating system protections, because the threat level has risen to the point where we need better protections at that level. And then if we had better authentication, like knowing whether or not you're talking to Amazon, knowing whether or not you're talking to your bank, that would also help a lot, I think. So that's the end.
Yeah. So, two sort of takeaways for me on that last part there. One, use an ad blocker, not something that I was thinking about before Ken and I started talking about it. And two, when I hear the tech support scam, I still sort of think about what might be described as the old tech support scam, where you pretend that there's some antivirus and they get you for a couple $100 or whatever to get rid of that antivirus. But that's not really what we're talking about anymore, right? We're talking about what you see in the Beekeeper, or where they escalate to accessing your bank accounts, and it's quite a bit more serious than that. So that takes us to the end. Sorry that we had to run a little bit through the tech support slides. Thank you for all of the great questions. Sorry that even as we still didn't quite get to every one of the questions. I apologize for that. But thank you for joining us. We are going to do another NASAA Presents, a series of them in March about women, aging, and money. So I hope you'll join again for that on March 12th, 19th, and 26th. In the meantime, I really want to thank Ken Westbrook. I always learn something when I talk to you, and I really appreciate you presenting today. This was great.
Well, it was a thrill to be here today. It's a thrill to be talking to a group of people who are passionate about fighting fraud, and so I welcome that.
Thank you very much, and we will talk to you all sometime soon. Have a great day.